Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to the very first episode of the pilot project called PLOspectives. Actually, doesn't have an official name yet. I'm still considering between PLOspectives and PLO on horns or just on horns. So yeah, you can let me know in the comments what you think and which one do you prefer better. But the idea of the show is that we're gonna take one pillow hand, we're gonna um, go through the action and see how each party should have played their hand and how they should construct their ranges. So without further ado, let's jump right into the action and see what it has to offer. So in this hand, hero is in the small blind with 7755, and it gets folded around to small blind, who decides to open. And let's start with preflop. If we take a look at the sim, which is below 200 zoom rake structure, 7755 is 100% open. Solver does even mix in some limps with double suited hand, but I think it is logical and makes a lot of sense to open this hand here, and no questions arise here in this spot. So once small blind raise, let's see how big blind should react. Versus small blind raise, big blind should call 60% and raise 11, which also kind of makes sense. We know wide range is in play, and big blind has position, should do a lot of 3-betting, so overall makes sense. And given that assumption, we're gonna assign for preflop to our villain um, a range of raise first in 50. This is the widest range possible here in Poker Juice. And we also gonna exclude 10% in position 3-betting range. So because we get called by villain and don't face a 3-bet, therefore we're gonna assign those ranges. Um, so we get called and we see a flop of king 10 3. Now to understand better, we're gonna take a look at the flop sim, how our overall range plays here on this board. And as you can see, our overall strategy is to be c-betting here for like roughly 55% frequency with 75% sizing. And that kind of makes sense if you take a look at the equity graph. We have equity advantage across the whole range on this board. That also makes sense because we didn't get 3-bet preflop. And big blind should be 3-betting a lot of kings, a lot of Broadway hands. So yeah, kind of makes sense. As for our specific hand, 7755, oops, 7755. It is split here between checking and betting. So like one of the patterns is we want to have at least one backdoor flush draw to be c-betting here. And if we take a look at our specific hand, we do have that backdoor spades, which kind of allows us to make that c-bet on the flop. So we also made that c-bet. And as for villain, villain should be folding around 50%, calling 37, and raise 14 or like almost 15%, which is pretty high frequency, raising 15%, and not many players will find enough raises here. So once we don't see a raise, once we get called, like just called, we can start excluding some hands from villain's range. And for now, I excluded hands like two pair, like 10-3 or better, which have at least a gut shot or better. So like any two pair with at least a gut shot or better. Also excluded kings that don't have a 10 and a 3 in their hands. So like the most obvious slow plays in positions would be like king 10, king 3, because they block like my continuing range. So in position wants to keep out of position range as wide as possible, because once it puts in a raise on the flop, blocking my continuing range in position gonna face too many folds on the flop, and it doesn't make sense to force out my weakest part of the range. And so king, which also blocks a board pair, preferred to go for the slow play. For that reason, I excluded those, which I think is fair. Also excluded some 10-10 that have a king, because 10-10 king is a frequent raise on the flop, unblocking queen jack combos, or kind of blocking whatever. Also excluded bottom set, which has a king or a 10 in it, because those are also frequent raises on the flop. So that still leaves some sets in our opponent calling range, which I think is fair, because first of all, players will not be raising all of these hands, and second of all, like I find this is the best way to kind of split or define range by like having a limited syntax. And once we get called, we need to assign. I'm going to show that we actually do get called here on the flop. We need to assign our villain a range. What is he calling here with? And so I gave him a range of any pair with a gut shot or better to start with. Also, any pair with at least one backdoor flush draw. So it would be 3+ hearts, spades, clubs. Kind of makes sense, right? So any two pairs or better without any limitations. Any wrap, you can see queen jack 9 or better. Ace queen jack 9 is also kind of a single combo, but it is a, if I remember correctly, that was pretty much straight call or something like that. Ace queen jack 9. Yeah, you can see ace queen jack 9 is pretty much 100% call. And also any gutshot or better, which has doesn't have a flop pair but has backdoor flush draw. So I think it's very plausible and logical to like assign this range and count it fair, right? So we get called and we head on a turn, which is the 2 of spades. Now on the turn we have a decision whether we want to double barrel or not, and if this hand is a good double barrel in the first place or not. And to get a better grasp of the spot, I ran 2 different sims. First one is I gave the solver the only option to bet for pot size, and the second one I allowed him to have 2 bet sizings, 33% and a pot size. And interesting thing that if we look at this sim with the single bet size option, so then 7755, regardless of the presence of the flush draw, is pretty much a 100% check and not a double barrel. But if you allow solver to have 2 bet sizings and you give him 7755 with the flush draw, then suddenly it becomes 100% bet with the presence of the flush draw. So I think, or as you can see, the difference between those strategies is that we do way more betting having 2 bet sizings. So when we have two bet sizings, we bet roughly 60% with 60% frequency instead of betting 35% frequency with only single bet sizing. And actually, if you take a look at EVs here, big blind out of position EV is 706 big blinds per 100 compared to 695 in position. But if we have two sizings, suddenly out of position loses some of his EV and big in position actually benefits. It kind of makes sense because in position gets to over realize or gets to call and continue wider versus small sizings and therefore make some better plays on the river, whereas out of position will have hard times on the rivers playing out of positions. And so solver does mix those 7755 into pot size c bet here when given two bet size options, but it's hard to balance and construct those ranges properly. So I actually, as an exploit, I think putting 7755 into my double barrel here, still having one betting size here, is a decent option, because I'd rather give up some of these hands and substitute it with 7755 rather than be barrel in a hand like ace queen jack with naked ace of spades, something like that. I would rather check call this hand and double barrel 7755. So we do go for that double barrel, and we get called by the big blind, and we need to assign a range once again, because we need to narrow down his range on the turn. So we need to exclude some of the hands which he would be raising us with. And first of all, I had some slightly advanced range here. I tried to also keep in some sets and two pairs, but actually, from my practice, I just don't see people calling enough in position here with obvious value hands like king 10 or better, like any set, pretty much any king 10 or better, as I said, which slow played on the flop, which makes a lot of sense. But now with the presence of the flush draw, many of them are incentivized to raise. This is the latest spot to be raising for value here, because suddenly there are now way more draws on the board. The the most obvious slow plays in positions would be king 10 or better that have either flush draw themselves or queen or jack that block some of the straight in runouts. But again, as I said, in position, population doesn't really have enough slow plays here, and once they call on the turn, they really I can literally discard any king 10 or better from their range. And for calling range, I have assigned them to have any two pairs, like any deuce 3 or better, any wrap or better, or any pair with at least a gut shot or better, and the flush draw. This kind of, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit arguable, but fair enough, I would say. And yeah, and we head to the river. Once the ranges are defined, we see a river of 6 of diamonds, which is a pretty blank and actually benefits our hand a lot. And now we need to decide whether we want to bluff this hand or not, because obviously 7-7 is not a great showdown value. Like once we check, it's gonna be hard to win. I mean, if in position has a weaker hand, then probably gonna turn it into a bluff, and we will not be able to call. Check raising doesn't also makes much sense, and so we kind of want to decide whether we want to give up with our busted draws, or if we want to turn our hand into a bluff and go for the third barrel. And let's look what Solver thinks of it. For that I run a reverse sim, and if we enter 7755, yeah, once we decide to take the double barrel line on the turn, it is gonna be always a triple barrel with a pretty decent EV of approximately 6 big blinds, which to me kind of makes sense, like given the run out, given the our blockers. Let's see what similar hands would want to double and triple barrel from the solver's perspective. So on the turn, if I filter hands by saying I want to see hands that are weaker than 2 pair, so any 1 pair holdings or weaker. That's the wrong sim. I need one sizing sim because it's more implementable. Second, here we are. So I want to filter out any 1 pair or weaker holdings to see which type of hands want to go for the double barrel here. And we can see hands like queens with the flush draw and also board pair blocker, board pair plus gutshot plus weak flush draw, ace 5-5-3, again the same pattern, like weak flush draw, gutshot, some future straight blockers, and queens also act like a future straight blockers here as well. Else, ace queen 3-9, again gutshot, weak flush draw, board pair blocker. Ace 4-5, that's a wrap with the flush draw, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a lot of like strong draws, a lot of Jack 4-4 is actually very interesting, very good double barrel. So we have kind of the best blockers to be double and then triple barrel in a lot of runouts. We have like future Broadway straight blockers, we have future wheel straight blockers, we have flush draw, we even have might have the best hand at the moment because we can get called by weaker draws. So interesting. Queen Jack 3-4, yeah. So the main pattern here is to have board pair blocker, gut shot, some kind of flush draw. Those are kind of key elements. Yeah, maybe future straight blockers as well, but not necessarily. It's like the more you stack of those components, the more effective the double barrel becomes. The intention of triple barrel in some of the runouts. So, and if we filter out triple barrel bluffs here, by saying that we once again want to see hands that are weaker than 3 deuce, which is 2 pair. We see a lot of those hands being turned into bluff. Queens and like Broadway paired are being checked because they have a decent showdown value. But hands like Ace 4-4-3, which is like pair of threes, but just I bet there was a flush draw to go along with this. Leverages fours as blockers and goes for the triple barrel bluff here, which I love a lot. I also want to filter out by the EVs. So if we take a look here in the top of the list, the most effective bluffs are hands that contain wheel blockers like 5s and 4s. 5-5-4-4, you can see Ace-10 5-5, 7-6 5-5. Yeah, pretty similar hand to ours. Yeah, all the top of the list, all of them have at least 1, 4, or a 5, and go for the triple barrel bluff. This is our main candidate here. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And let's see if our triple barrel bluff here is a PLOspectives spot or not, given the range in play. As we discussed, we went for that triple barrel. But let's now try to calculate, given the range that we assigned to our villain, if this is actually a PLOspectives spot or not. For that, we're going to take the shoving module and we're going to assign a bluff catching range. What do you think our villain's bluff catching range in this spot would be, to make it fair enough? And I would say that his most effective and also the most close to the reality, or how the population plays, would be a 10-3 or better that have a 4 or a 5 in their hands. So any two pairs of 10-3 or higher, because 3 deuce I don't think wants to bluff catch here because yeah, like obvious reasons. 3 deuce doesn't make a good bluff catch. Deuce 6, 6-3, yes, either. But 10-3 with a blocker to a straight like a 4 or 5 kind of makes it fair enough, I would say. And we're gonna run the module under these assumptions and see the results. Yeah. One step back. Gonna run. So if we can assume that our assumptions are correct, then you can see here that in position will be folding 80% and bluff catching like roughly 20%. And the EV of our bet is here like 13.5 euros, which is roughly over 6 big blinds, which is similar to what Solver was suggesting. But the thing is that we can not only rely on Solver output, right? We also need to consider our opponent who we're playing against. And if you suddenly happen to be playing versus Station, who doesn't really care about having the blockers to be bluff catching, and let's say he's gonna bluff catch you with any 10-3 or better, so to speak. We're gonna run discard the blockers. We're gonna run the module once again to see how the EV of the spot changes. Now suddenly, if our opponent is a station doesn't give a damn about the presence of the blockers, he's going to be folding only 50% instead of 80, and he's going to be bluff catching us roughly half of the times. and suddenly our EV from being like um, positive drops to hugely minus EV spot. So from winning 6 big blinds, we're now down 50, what's it like 52, 53 big blinds. This is insane. So like we really need to be considering the type of opponent we are playing against, and it makes a lot of sense to be betting versus more tight opponents, the ones who are like not that happy to bluff catch, or maybe don't go too often to showdown. And this is something you can see from a stat if you can use a HUD at your tables. So yeah, I just wanted to show you the difference, because the hand on itself doesn't mean anything. Cards don't play cards, it's the people who do. And recognizing what type of opponent you are up against can hugely increase your win rate if you can leverage this knowledge properly. That's gonna be it for this episode, guys. I really appreciate you for your attention. Please let me know in the comments what you think about this type of content, how I could improve it, and which type of name I should put into this new series. Thank you guys once again. See you later. Take care. I'm your Pillow Bull Flares. See you at the tables. Stay unbeatable.